array of talent that has joined us here. So I'm Cara Mertes. I'm head of Just Films. I'm from the old world of 2D cinema, and I'm here as chief listener and learner to really listen to the incredible work of these panelists here. And I thought what I would do is just, it's as if William and I talked, and it's always good to follow William because he gives you such incredible liftoff for the work that you might want to talk about afterwards. And so when I was thinking about how we would enter this conversation, I thought, you know, we've been here before. And I went back and looked for images from the 1800s, but actually went backwards from there. And you can see this yearning that human beings have had for centuries, actually, to kind of reimagine or imagine spaces that we can be in, to reproduce them, to be able to carry them with us, to make them transportable. And these are all the many contraptions, especially in the 1800s. But I went further back and asked about the origins of language itself. The first written forms of language were 5,000 years ago. And language itself, it's unknown when language itself started, spoken language. And so as we're searching for new languages, I think one of the things that I wanted to remind us of is our sort of biological imperative toward narrative, which has been age-old. And of course, we all know the caves, but what is so astounding about these drawings from about 17,500 years ago is the sense in which they want to call forward a space and a presence and movement. And if you think about VR and the way that you're sort of situated in a 360 space, and you think about being in a cave, surrounded by drawings like this, it's pretty remarkable that our imaginings, our desires to be inside landscapes is as old as humanity, human consciousness itself. So I also decided to go into the work of each of the panelists and made a little slide for each of them to kind of trigger maybe a little response and also give us some themes that we're going to talk about as we talk about VR. And this is a quote from one of Jessica's blogs. Editing harnesses the power of discovery. It's a craft that celebrates the paths our minds choose to take, the psychologically interesting, complex, and correct patterns that reflect the kinds of shifts of attention and realization that go on in real life. And this is a sort of riff on a quote from Walter Murch, who is one of the great editors, one of the great stitchers of reality in film, fiction film, actually, but he has a very interesting take on representations of reality. And so Jessica is one of these people that is actually making the new rules and asks the question, what happens actually to narrative structure as we understand it and have been practicing it for the last century as we move into this new world? And so for Oscar, every camera movement is a moral choice, and there is a sense of the ethical in Oscar's work that I wanted to call out and have us think about and have him talk about. And William also mentioned the importance of developing an ethics of VR. And this is actually to do not necessarily with languages of storytelling, but with its effect on the human body. And this is the constant through all of these technologies, is we're asking what story has, what is the relationship between the body and story. And here, of course, is our train, again, as if William and I coordinated. But we had to bring this up because we think of the technologies as being affected and impacted by the context in which, and a result of the time in which they are invented. And Margaret Atwood talks about technology influencing what gets told and how it gets transferred. And so this moment of experiencing the moving image at this size, and feeling the weight and almost bringing the senses to an image like this, if we can imagine those new audiences, is very resonant with today. And so this was my note for Felix as he is thinking about his presentation. And then for Urson, who actually is bringing us into new spaces in incredible ways through not just human perception, but perceptions of other beings, which I think is very important as we think about VR. And so for us at Just Films, I'll just say a word about this, why we're interested. We're expanding from 2D, linear, to think about all kinds of moving image story technology, because for us, the question of social justice and how we make change in the world through our narratives is paramount. And as we see this new world unfolding and we see the uses that people are bringing to it, we understand that this is going to have to be a space where we need to follow our artists. And again, it's always about where our artists are going. And we see, especially our documentary filmmakers, but even more, we see performance artists, we see sculptors, we see anybody who has a sort of moving or an image-based background coming into this space and actually beginning to work on it. And so we're doing a couple of things early on besides the research. We want to create corridors for experimentation for artists who would otherwise not have access to this technology, and artists who you wouldn't necessarily expect to be working with this technology, to find them and create the space for experimentation so that new ideas can be had at this very, very pivotal moment of creation of new rules. We are looking at the question of inclusivity. We want to make sure every room, our goal would be every room that we're in is a room that represents and reflects the realities of the people who are living in a particular region, a particular community. And so we want to make sure that those rooms do not remain white dominant and do not remain class dominant in terms of being able to have access because of a certain access to wealth and opportunity. Because those stories are the stories, actually, we think, that will define new kinds of futures. And then finally, that question of ethics is something that we want to explore. So with that, I'm going to ask Jessica to come up and start, and then Oscar will follow. And then we will have Felix and Urson. And then we will all come up and join. I'll want to harvest some questions from the room. And then I know people really want to get into this discussion, so we might lob one question for the panel. But really, we want to invite this to become a big circle conversation, if you can imagine a virtual circle. And we'll all join in to kick off the day. So thank you very much. And thanks to Sarah and William and the MIT Open Doc Lab for putting this together. Extraordinary, extraordinary day and extraordinary room that's here. So thank you all for coming.